It's been a little while since we painted Nurgle here on the channel, and while I do have some more Nurgle content planned, that's a little way off in the future from now. So today what I thought I'd do is paint up some skin in a nice putrid Nurgle scheme in a really quick, easy manner. And we're going to be using a Bloat-Drone for this because it has a lot of really nice details and textures all across the model. We will be painting the rest of this model in another video, which is going to be all of the battle damage, the armor and everything like that. So if you're interested in that, do make sure to subscribe, but for today, let's jump straight into the skin. For the skin here, we need a few different paints to kick us off with, and ideally, if we've got one, a wet palette, which will be really helpful in maintaining the working life of our paints, as well as keeping any mixes workable for longer. We need a range of 3 red skin tones. Here we have a red burgundy, a dark shadowy flesh, and a fairly middle of the road tan flesh. On the other side, we're going to need some nice putrid tones. Starting with a medium, vibrant yellow-green tone, we can then move through to a pale desaturated green, with our third colour coming in the form of a light khaki. We can also add to the palette a little bit of warm flesh, which is a lighter tone than all of the others in the mixes that we've got so far. And this will be useful if we need to brighten up any of the mixes beyond our brightest colour. At any point, we can use this in both colour ranges, both the reds and the greens. Obviously, as you can probably tell at this point, we're aiming for 2 different styles of skin tone and skin type, for lack of a better set of words. What we're aiming for is some red, sore, worn flesh, the sort of flesh tones you see when things are being bound, constantly rubbed and worn, and then boils start appearing. That lovely image has just appeared in your head. On the inverse, we also want some really nice yellowish greenish skin tones that feed into that Nurgle vibe and gives us that nice sickening jaundiced pustular vibe. Back at the desk with our paints laid out, we want our model and we're going to start from a zenithal prime. What this will do is help to show all of the various details across the model, and we're going to need that because we're going to be picking them out with a brush a bit later on. First, for the skin, we're going to want to thin down the burgundy from our red side of the palette. And then we're going to work this round and apply it to any of the elements of skin that we would expect large amounts of rubbing. Mainly here, we're focusing on the areas where skin meets things like armor, or meeting things along the lines of straps holding the flesh in place. We can also use this color to base coat any of the battle damaged areas, so any of the big slashes and things like that in the armor. We can use this color to base coat it, but it's worth remembering we're not going to be actually covering that in detail in this video, and we're going to be mentioning this detail on the base coat in the next video. So don't worry, but it's just worth bearing that in mind. Once our red is down and dry, what we can do is start to map out all of the green elements of skin. This will be essentially working round and blocking out the rest of the areas of skin which are currently unpainted, and we're going to be blocking them out in our green based coat tone. Applying thin layers of this will help to get a nice decent consistency over the area, while not removing any of the red that we've applied earlier if we get a little bit too close. However, there is clearly still a line of separation between these 2 colours, but this will be solved in a few steps without a lot of effort in the form of wet blending. Overall, this is a quick process, but we need both of the colours on the palette, and we want to apply one colour over the appropriate area and then apply the next. This is where a wet palette can come in handy, leaving our colours wetter and workable for longer. We're going to start off the wet blending by going round and applying the green over all of the areas that we've previously applied green. Then quickly, while it's still wet, we want to come in and apply the burgundy in the recesses of any of the red sections nearby the green that we've applied. It's then just a case of pulling these 2 colours together over the transition line, and what this will do is mix on the model. If one section does start to get a little bit too dirty or muddy, don't worry, what we can do is either apply a little more of one colour over another to try and balance that out, or if we're a little bit too far along the process and the paints have started drying, what we can do is wait for it to fully dry and then reapply another wet blend. Now, it's worth noting that you can skip the initial pre-phase that we did where we went in and layered in the red and the green and then just go straight in for the wet blending off the bat, straight from the zenithal. There are a couple of reasons why I do like to do the pre-step though, however. One, it has the advantage of us going around and being able to map out the rough ratios so we know how much of the wet blend we want in any particular colour. The other benefit is it means that if there are any sections of the wet blending that get potentially a little bit thin, we don't have to worry as much because we've got the colour that we want in that area underneath in most of the places anyway. So we get a nice consistent coat off of the wet blend, meaning that we don't have to do 3 or 4 wet blends. We can just do the pre-stage and hopefully just 1 layer of wet blend to give us a really nice starting point. And it is a starting point because once the wet blending is dry, we want to come in and start to do some highlighting on the various skin tones. For the red, what we want to do is take our burgundy and then mix in our shadow skin tone, which is the second one in our red range. This will make a slightly pinkish red skin tone. This can then be applied in thin coats, covering most of the red skin areas, building up a light brightness and leaving the dense red base coat in the deepest recesses. This red highlight will be applied in relatively smooth coats in order to try and sell that worn, shiny skin look from very worn and ragged flesh. Whereas when we're first highlighting the green, we are also mixing our first 2 colours together, giving us a nice pale mix of our base coat. And then what we're going to do is apply this in a scratchy highlight manner, going around and highlighting all of the green saggy areas of skin, but making sure that we are working in small up and down strokes, building up the concentration in the centre masses of those bulbous areas of flesh. Some areas, however, are quite small and it's not practical to go in and do these small lines. So what we did instead for these areas is we went in and did a small localized stippling. The intention here is to make sure that we've got a little bit of variation across the skin. So we're going to have the green sections with some nice scratchy, stripy highlights. And then we're also going to have the red sore skin. And in that highlight, we're going to go smoother and try and make it look more shiny and a little bit more reflective than the other elements. And overall, that gives us a nice bit of variation. And we're going to be doing that by, last time we used a mix of our 2 colours, our first level and second level colour. Now we're going to be jumping in with just thinned down versions of our mid-tone, which is our second colour in each of the red and green sections. Last time we started with the red, so this time let's flip it and start with the green. We can take our pale green, which is the middle colour in our green range, and then work around applying narrower highlights than the first initial highlight round. But we still want to maintain that consistent up and down scratchy highlight pattern, building up in the centre of the skin areas. Then for the worn red skin, what we want to do is thin down our shadow flesh, which is the second in the red range, and then use this to boost our last round of highlights, giving a really nice worn ragged flesh feel. At this point, we need to pivot for some areas. Things like the tentacles around the face. These have ridges and rings going down them. So what we want to do is make sure that when we're highlighting these, we highlight in strokes in the same direction as these coils to overemphasize these points and details. As you would expect, the next stages for each of the color and skin areas is much the same. So we're going to be covering both off on screen now. And if you want to jump back and rewatch any particular section of the video, or potentially this entire video again, you have the option to do so. But what we want to do is take the last colours and then mix in the third colours in each set. This will give us on the red side a really nice desaturated red skin tone. And for the green, we've got a green shifting towards a jaundiced khaki yellow. All of the areas will still be highlighted in the same manner as before, keeping in mind that we're going to be treating certain areas specially, like the tentacles, which will be highlighted as mentioned earlier. We will be hitting a very small amount of the surfaces on this particular pass. This is most important for the reds, where we want to be really careful and apply a very precise edge highlight on all of the sharpest, most strained sections of flesh, as well as any of the edges of torn flesh. The intention of the different highlight methods for both the red and the green flesh is just to give us a nice little bit of difference and a bit of nuance in the painting of those areas, but also there are methods behind it. The reason that we're going for up and down repetitive scratchy strokes for the green skin areas is because on this model, a lot of those areas are bulbous and stretched. So we're using the up and down stroke motion to kind of simulate stretch marks that appear on skin when it bloats out incredibly fast. So by doing this in multiple highlight passes and making it thinner, we get that sort of edged, nice pattern of the strokes going up and down. And when we're finished, only some of them are going to be showing up, which is really, really nice and gives us that stretched skin feel. But now what we're going to be doing is going on to the last precision highlights for both the red and the green flesh. These final highlights will be more like a traditional edge or spot highlight. For the green skin sections, we will now be abandoning our previously used up and down scratchy highlight effect, and we will be applying thin lines and dots across all the most stretched areas, giving us a bright small pop of a yellow tinge to the skin. While as for all of the red sections, we're going to be taking our tan flesh and we're going to be mainly spot highlighting and stipple edge highlighting all of the edges of the ragged flesh and worn flesh, giving us a nice element of texture. To be honest, if you like how it looks now, you can stop the rest of the scheme here for the skin. It is quite a pale desaturated look and it has its own sort of benefits. But personally, I wanted something a little bit more punchy and vibrant. So what we're going to be doing is grabbing some washes, thinning them down and essentially using them as glazes in order to get that nice punch of colour and vibrance in the skin sections. First, we need a green wash, and I tend to personally lean towards a muddy dark green, as I feel this leans more towards Nurgle than a bright Eldar style green, but each to their own at the end of the day. What we want to do is thin down our chosen green wash and then apply this carefully and smoothly across the flesh areas. Yes, all of the flesh areas on this particular pass. This is going to do two things. It will slightly tinge the yellow skin back to a more Nurgle-esque green, but it will also slightly desaturate and nicely recess shade all of our red skin areas. Now, if our red skin areas have slightly desaturated, you know what that means. That means we can thin down a ruby wash, and then we can come in with thin coats and apply this across the various red sections of skin. We can do this over a couple of thinned passes, allowing us to bring the saw brightness back into any areas with the most amount of control. For example, on this model, we've not only just got the flesh and the rips and the saw bits where all of the fabrics and leather straps are holding it together, but we've also got countless amounts of boils and spots and pimples and things like that. And the important thing about this is we can use that ruby wash to go in and add the saw looking effect in those areas, even if we haven't painted it up to this point in the red. The red will work against the green in a very similar sort of way that the green worked against the red. It will slightly desaturate and then start to warm up and add a pink hue to any of those areas, which gives us that really nice worn skin that's been stretched as a spot or a boil has forced its way through the skin. With that lovely image in mind, let's jump across to painting all of the boils and the spots on the model. For this, we want to build up the feeling of a pus-filled sack, pushing its way through the surface of the skin until it's at the point being ready to rupture. So we can kick this all off with a nice orange ochre and then give all of the boils a nice quick base coat. Some of the larger boils may need a couple of passes, but the simpler, smaller spots will normally just need one quick dab and an application to give us that dot of colour. From there, we want to start to build up the pus, and we're going to be doing this by applying a dot of a yellow. We're aiming for a pale yellow, which we can then build up in a ring or circle dot at the centre of our spots. Then what we're going to do is add the very head of the spot, and we can do this by taking a very pale skin tone and then applying a small dot to the very top of the boil to show where the skin is the weakest and about to pop. If you want, you can stop here, but personally I feel that this isn't worn, sore or red enough for the boils on this model, and for this size specifically. So what we're going to do is add to the effect by grabbing a thinned red wash that we used earlier and then gently apply a glaze over all of the larger boils, tinting the surface slightly red. We can then, once this is dry, go back to our pale yellow and then essentially reinforce that spot highlight that we did on the boils to make it look like it's ready to burst. Once it's dry, the skin is essentially sorted at this point. Obviously, this is a multi-stage video. We're going to be coming back and painting all of the battle damage, all of the wounds, as well as all of the armor and the weapons. This model was actually given to me by my nephew. It was quite damaged. I've managed to recover a lot of the elements. The guns are obviously missing off of here, but I have got them and just need to do a little bit of work on them separately, as well as the fact you may have noticed that a lot of the spikes and points have actually been cut off the model. And that's because a lot of them were missing, and rather than sculpting new ones on, I thought it was more efficient just to remove all of them. Now, as I said, multi-part video, so we are going to be coming back and painting the armor and everything like that in future. But if you like what you've seen so far today, you like the video, and you would like some armor options for painting this guy, why not check out a video that we've already done on Nurgle, which you can find here. Otherwise, make sure that you subscribe so that we can see you next time.